What time do you guys want to get started?
Yeah, I think we got about, we have 19 people I'm tracking. Ryan, Joe, Jonathan, should we go get started?
Yeah, I think so, Ryan.
Yeah, I agree. Let's get started. Alrighty, so I'm Ryan Sidlick, president of ISC2. Just want to thank everybody for attending the meeting. I'm trying to think if we've got any business coming up anybody needs to mention. I know that I was at ISC2 Congress, and so was Joe. So it was a great event. It was cool to be a part of the nationals. So if anybody's got any questions about that, let me know. But if you ever get a chance to attend that, definitely do it. But was anybody else here at ISC2 Congress besides Joe and myself? I will take that as a no. But again, a good event if you ever get a chance to go. Beyond that, any other business going on? Chris, Lisa, Anna, Joe?
Just if you want CPEs, make sure I have your number. If you're already in the member list, I have your number. So I'll just try to take roll from the chat here.
Yeah,
Ron?
nothing else from my end.
Yes,
You're
Ron
you're
would
wa
like-
you're waving, Ron.
yes, Ron. I would like credit, please.
Can you put your information in the chat just to make sure I have it?
Sure.
Social security number, credit card, mother's maiden
Yeah.
name. What you do it.
Yes.
All of that.
And make sure everybody gets it. Send it to everyone.
Yeah, so definitely put that in there, especially like some people, like for example, Ray Pasco, I think that's you. If you don't have your last name in the chat, just put, I mean, if you don't have it in the Zoom, just put it in the chat. That way we know who it really is.
Yeah, I got Ray, but Ray, I think I need your CISSP number because I looked at the list. I didn't see it on there.
Yeah, I don't think we have yours, Ray.
So make sure your credit card goes on there with that.
Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to mention was that IC2 is doing, they are completely changing like the cyber safe program. So it's going to be, it used to be a focus of mainly just keeping kids away from like online threats, predators, that kind of thing. What they're really trying to do more is broaden it and make it almost more educational about cybersecurity careers in addition to that previous mission. So they're really trying to revamp it quite a bit. So as that happens and we find out more about it, we might try to set up some events like at schools or in conjunction with ISC2 just to get that going, because before it was kind of a hassle. You had to have a bunch of kits sponsored for classroom activities. Now it's totally changing. I don't think there'll be as many hurdles as there were before. So I do expect our chapter to increase its engagement rather of K to 12 in some capacity, to be determined, but that's what I do expect to see here based on those changes. And the only other change I might want to mention is that we have had scholarships in the past, and the way things are going now with the new the new candidate program, which means you can be affiliated with ISC2 National before you take an exam, or the new associate level exam, which you do not need any prior experience to pass and any prior experience to attain that cert. For our scholarships, we might look into funding students either through study programs or taking those exams, that kind of thing, because I think it does more good for more students. Like if you're looking at like a college scholarship or like a CSSP exam, those are really expensive and you can't really serve a lot of students. But with the new approach, like if you sponsor an exam, through and a lot of those exams are free now anyway, but even if it's not free, I mean, it's much cheaper. I mean, you might be looking at $50 to $100 on that, and we could cover a lot of students that way. So those are two changes you might expect to see in the future, not necessarily going to be very visible ones to everybody here. We just want to make folks aware of that. That's kind of the way nationals is going. So that's the way we'll be following with them. And Joe, do you have any observations from Congress you want to mention, or any thoughts on it, or just
No,
experiences?
I mean, yeah, nothing specific. There's some really great sessions. So, I'm not sure if you can, buy into the virtual sessions, but the replays are available there. I would say that the one big takeaway was that, I'll say one big takeaway, but there's a takeaway that next year's is going to be in Nashville. So, I believe it's like October 23rd through 25th. So a little bit closer for some of us. If you're interested in going, I definitely think it was a good experience. This was my first one. It's kind of neat having a couple of different activities going on, and then also just networking in itself. And then sessions, I'll say that there were probably a little bit too many sessions that were more interesting than I had time to be able to attend. So that was a little bit of a challenge. I heard that through a couple of the other contacts I had out there. So it's just kind of which one do you want to go to in live versus go watch the replays later on. The only other thing is I saw on ISD Square on the blog post there's an upcoming vote for the new bylaws, and so apparently there's a little bit of controversy. So I won't say specifically like my opinion of that, but there's some changes on there that I think as an organization everybody should review and just make sure that's in alignment with what your thoughts are, or if you think that there should be any changes and whatnot from that perspective. I think they're asking for votes on the October 19th. I'm looking through the blog post right now. So you should see it in your email if you're an eligible ISC Square member, meaning you're in good standing and not suspended or anything like that, or under ethical investigation. You should be getting an email on the 19th saying the voting is open, and then it closes on November 19th. So that again will be the bylaws for ISC Square, the organization itself, not just like our chapter. So some of the key to review, I just saw a couple posts on my LinkedIn about it and got my, sparked my interest a little bit, but didn't see anything notifying us at all about it yet, which is part of the, people are frustrated with that, but I think the email should come out on the 19th. So just, be aware of that. Should be any day. So yeah, that's all I had. I'll post a link to the blog post there in the chat. So feel free to review that. And then community conversation was happening in the community portal.
Any discussions from ISC Squared about creating certification regarding OT?
There's some talks on OT, but I didn't hear anything specifically about OT from a certification perspective. They are talking about there will be certificates. So like we have our CISP and everything, and then you have the specific certifications or specialized certifications on top of the CISP. There's going to be other certificates for cloud and for, I believe, database. Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's database, cloud, and there's something else that sounded interesting to me. That should be posted here in the coming, I believe in the coming month. So you don't have to have a CISP. You don't have to have your CCSP or anything like that. It's basically like certificates similar to like things something like you might do on like LinkedIn or something like that. But it's basically, do you have knowledge in that space? And so basically, again, but kind of what Ryan was saying is that, if you start off with the CC certification, then you want to have like some specializations or show that those skills for other certificates. Again, they're not certifications, but they're certificates. Those are going to be available. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit more specializations and things like that they're coming out with.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And they are one other thing on that CC certification, so entry level. I think Security Plus has been is a part of that DoD correct me if I'm wrong, it's like the 8751 or something like that. And someone on the call will know that one, but basically approved DoD certifications. The CC is they're working on getting that part of that as well for entry level. So it's like level ones, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah,
85.
it's DOD 8570.
Yeah.
So I included the link there.
Yeah. So they're looking to get that added to that. So, I think Security Plus has been one of the main ones for people who are working on some of the DoD contracts, or for DoD. The CC certification should help with that as well, and be another certification for entry levels. So I think that should be by end of the year. So that's all I had.
Oh, want me to start?
Oh, one more thing I do want to mention. I did get to give the talk on the ISC2 study groups at the Solutions Theater at Congress, and it was very well received. So again, just thanks to Anna and Lisa for all the hard work on that. People are very impressed by that study group program and the results. So again, a lot of positive feedback. With that, Jonathan, John, I think we're ready.
All right, sounds good. All right. Let me just do some window management here. In case anyone decides to come on camera. All right, there we go. So cool. So yeah, what I'm going to be talking about tonight is assessing cloud native environments against some best practices that we in the CNCF have kind of authored and distilled down. If you'd like to look at the slides, you can just go here to scI.so/ISC2, and that'll work for at least a couple of days until I decide to remove it. So there's not a ton to these slides. There are some links in the slides. We'll go through a few things. Like I said before, this is going to be more like a guided tour than a formal presentation. That also means that it's very open to interruptions or questions as we go. You can use the raise hand feature if you'd like. You can also just unmute and start talking. Both are fine with me. So if you don't know me, my name's Jon Zeolla. I have a security consulting company called CISO, and I'm based out of Pittsburgh. I do a lot of work in open source. So the Apache Software Foundation, the OpenSSF, and the CNCF primarily. And then I do some of my own kind of open source stuff. And I'm also a SANS instructor and INS faculty and things like that. But this talk is going to be mostly about some of the work that I'm doing in the CNCF. And Ryan, when he asked me to give this talk, I think the idea was just to kind of maybe give a survey of where open source projects have gotten recently, what their scope are, some specific things we're doing, and then just like kick off a bit of a conversation about these things, when you need them, when you don't need them, things like that.
Yeah, that sounds good. Really just to kind of give an overview of what you've been doing and working on and what's going on with this, the CNCF. Just even an overview is great, but obviously participation and, bringing other people's thoughts in is great too.
Yeah, 100%. So, so what we're going to talk about tonight primarily, hopefully with a few different asides, but we'll focus on this project that I'm leading in the CNCF called the Cloud Native Security Controls. So this is it's kind of like a two-phase project. Really, the first phase was a little bit more discrete with a start, end, and deliverable. And phase 2 is a little bit more perpetual, kind of like ongoing project. We'll dig into the details. So the first phase of the project, though, like I said, had a discrete deliverable, which we shipped in June of this year. So the idea of phase one is that there were a few different white papers in the cloud security landscape that were created, which are like these long form papers, right? If you pop them open, you'll see that they have lots of words and pictures, and you scroll for dozens of pages, right? And that's really good for reading and understanding some of these concepts. Here's another one, similar length. You know, good for reading and understanding these concepts. What should you be doing? What shouldn't you be doing? But it's a little bit more difficult to distill into a list of tasks that your company may want to actually follow or choose not to follow. So we did some work to make that a little bit easier, which we'll cover in a bit. And then now we're kicking off the second phase, which is automation around that process. But so before we get too far into that, I wanted to take a couple steps back and just talk about what the CNCF is. Does anyone raise a hands or come off mute? Is anyone familiar with what the CNCF is, how it works, why it was formed in the first place?
I have not.
Tell us more, John.
No awareness.
Cool. So so there's a little bit of a hierarchy here, and so we'll start at the top, right? The Linux Foundation. So if you're familiar with the Linux Foundation, there's a little bit of a kind of ongoing joke that the Linux Foundation is a foundation of foundations. It's kind of like that meme. I heard you like containers, so I put a container in your container, or whatever. So the Linux Foundation is an organization that has more recently just started to hold other foundations. One of those foundations is the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So the Cloud Native Computing Foundation was created when Google decided to open source Kubernetes. They announced it at DockerCon, and they said, this is going to be a great project. Lots of people saw that. They agreed. Adoption started expanding quickly. And we said, wow, like this is going to be big. But Kubernetes is focused on one solution or one set of solutions, right? Container orchestration. And there's going to be other helper projects in this ecosystem. We should put those all in a box. And we should say all of these new cloud native projects should be in the same box together in open source, and we'll have some governance and voting and oversight and things like that. And we'll make sure that it's a healthy ecosystem. So the Linux Foundation kind of undertook creating this Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And at the beginning, only Kubernetes was in it. So it was one project in there. Now there's lots of different projects. We'll talk about that on the next slide. But so there's lots of projects now. It has blossomed like we expected it would. And so as that grew, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the CNCF right here, decided, oh, well, we need, at the time they called them SIGs, these special interest groups. And so you might be interested in networking or security or documentation or whatever. And they made these different SIGs for that. One of those was called SIG Security, which is right here. That's our raccoon. And so previously it was called SIG Security. Then Kubernetes decided they also needed special interest groups. So Kubernetes made their own SIG network, SIG security, etc. And we ended up with two SIG securities, one for the CNCF, which is the container that holds Kubernetes and other things. And then there was a SIG security just for Kubernetes. That got a little confusing, so we renamed things. The CNCF level project, that higher level one, where it's more about the ecosystem, renamed into TAG-Security, the technical advisory group. And so now this group is called TAG-Security. So if you ever see like SIG Security and TAG-Security, there was a rename. It was confusing. It still is confusing. Then in the TAG-Security is how I'll refer to it now. TAG-Security group within the CNCF. What we do is we ensure we provide various different types of security services to the CNCF. So the CNCF is this group of projects that support Kubernetes and Kubernetes-like things, cloud-native things, right? Those projects themselves need things like security assessments. So as they change from maybe an incubating project to like a GA or a graduated project, in order to go between those levels of maturity in the CNCF, there's some strings attached. Most of the strings attached are about having a healthy group and environment. So they don't want one maintainer. They don't want one company that is using it in production, et cetera. They want to see a healthy, vibrant community with dozens of companies using it and tens or hundreds of maintainers on a given month and lots of activity and open processes that agree to the best way to do things instead of, one company just bulldozing people. If you can kind of demonstrate that over time, then you graduate. That's one of the strings attached. There's many others. One of the other ones is a security assessment. So the TAG-Security group, which I'm a member of, will perform a security assessment on the project itself. So we'll assess pretty much all of the projects in the CNCF except for Kubernetes, because Kubernetes, again, they have their own group that just focuses on Kubernetes, which I'm also involved with a little bit, but not nearly as much as like the whole ecosystem. So we do assessments on service meshes and cert management tools and CI/CD pipelines and whatever. And the idea is that we want to make sure that these tools have good security practices, that they have strong build pipelines with minimal dependencies, and that they're using signing, and that we're talking about the security of the build and development process itself. So if you have like application development at your company, it would be like the application security program, making sure that as those developers make changes and ship features that it's secure. Same sort of idea, except we're providing that as a service for free, all volunteer time to these CNCF projects. So as we were kind of going along, we were doing these assessments for CNCF projects and making sure that the projects themselves were being developed in a secure way and are built in a strong, kind of reproducible way that are kind of resilient against certain types of attacks of the like hosting infrastructure and things like that. But what we identified was that people take these projects in the CNCF and then they run them in their environments. And once you start to run them yourselves, that's kind of what's out of scope from those security assessments, how it's configured, and how it's running, how you're operating it day to day, your operational processes, all that stuff, right? That's out of scope from that earlier security assessment. We made sure you got the project safely. What you do with it is kind of your problem. But what we found is we were getting a lot of questions about, the now what, like, all right, I got this secure thing, but I want to run it securely. And so from that came a variety of different white papers, and those white papers provide, like I said, 60, 70, 80 pages of guidance, and people wanted to self-assess themselves against that. They wanted to make sure that their environment that's running these projects is secure. So that's how we started this Cloud Native Security Controls. Technically, it's the Cloud Native Security Controls catalog, but I'm trying to shorten the name as much as I can. So I usually just refer to it as the Controls Project. But that's kind of where this project came from. We were already volunteering to secure the project build. Now we're trying to secure the project run for the things in the CNCF. And so what are these projects? So if you go to the CNCF or landscape.cncf.io, they have a whole bunch of different ways to view projects that are in this ecosystem. And it's entirely dynamic. So if you go here, and if I roll the dice a little bit and just start checking boxes, you can see here that, those graphs, those pictures that we used to see kind of static. We have created a like dynamic version of it that has a bunch of metadata and filters, right? And as you look around, you can see the different sizes represent the maturity of the project and adoption and things like that. But there's just a lot. This is just like there's lots of projects in this ecosystem. And if you filter on the CNCF projects. These are projects that are completely run in the CNCF itself. It's this limited 132 projects from the overall 1200-ish, right? So there's a bunch of projects in here. These are the CNCF ones. You see a variety of different sizes. You've got your graduated projects, that's the top level projects, and then incubating, which means that you have some adoption. Then we've got sandbox, that's like the playground. It's a pretty low bar to get entered into the sandbox. But anyway, so that's what this ecosystem looks like. These are the 132 projects which are in the CNCF. So that's kind of the scope of this thing for now. We're planning to expand it, but we're focusing on those 132 projects right now. And so the other part of this is that, you know, auditors ask really pesky questions, right? I work with auditors a lot, and they want to know why. Sometimes they'll want to know why like 5 times in a row. And they want to sample things and look at things backwards and forwards and kind of pick things at random, ask how do you know, and those sorts of questions. And so for all these different controls, if you run in a regulated industry or in an environment that needs to have a certification or attestation or some sort of compliance, you're probably going to get audited, and you're going to need to answer those questions. Are you able to convince that person that you're doing good practices, best practices, whatever, you're following the requirements, you're doing what you said you would do, you know, in your governance, policy standards, etc. If you said all of our workloads are encrypted, prove it, right? Can you actually prove that stuff? And so this is a kind of a digest of the sorts of questions that we get, we being like this group that works on the Cloud Native Security Controls Catalog, with, you know, people that are involved in Cloud Native Security, work in the CNCF, etc. So, you know, people will come to us and say, you know, hey, we're building this thing. We want to do it the new way. We're sick of the old way. We want to do Kubernetes. We're going to do serverless. We're going to do, you know, whatever. We're building everything in unikernels and deploying it, you know, whatever that people are doing, right? We really want to do this the right way. And so we want to do it the right way from the functionality, modern development, agile, lean, whatever, and cloud native security. But we got this thing, you know, we got ISO 27001, or, you know, we got GDPR, you know, we got information for EU residents, or UK GDPR, or PCI, CMMC, you know, there's a whole bunch of them. And, you know, the people that want to build these things, they work at these companies that are tech companies, software companies. They build SaaS, PaaS, things like that. And the customers of their products give them security questionnaires, right? Big stack, here's 100, 200 questions. I'd like you to tell me, are you encrypting my data everywhere? Is it in transit? Is it at rest? You know, all these sorts of questions. And those questionnaires are a pain in the butt. I don't want to have to answer every single one of them for every single client every single year, especially if you're a critical vendor. That happens a lot. And also some of those are kind of old school terms, right? Like ISO 27001, while it's very kind of open, is from 2013, and they have a 2022 version, which is still pending release, but, you know, it's from 2013. And lots of these frameworks aren't necessarily as aligned with cloud native terminology or approaches. And so there's like a translation layer there. So, okay, here's what they said, here's what we're doing, you know, how do I map these things together? How do I connect them? It can be really confusing. If you work at all with Kubernetes, especially with Kubernetes security, hopefully you are familiar with this picture, or this, I don't even know how to pronounce that, Racine maybe. But this is Rory's blog, who's a member of SIG Security. Again, that's the Kubernetes security group. He's also in TAG-Security with us as well. And he took a look at the recent PCI container guidance. So PCI released some very specific containerization guidance to kind of modernize, the PCI 4 DSS stuff that they have. And so he kind of started to break it apart a little bit. And you can see things at this like higher level, taking sections from their report and talking about it in like a little bit of detail, but then he really digs in. There's some newer versions too, though. I think there's a part 2 of this that talks about like, okay, they say authentication needs to happen in this way. Specifically, what configuration options or what things do you need to do in Kubernetes to meet that expectation? And he will talk about how what they're recommending is or is not the default, and if it is not possible to even do what they're asking. So there are some features that you completely need to disable in Kubernetes to support this PCI guidance, etc. I'm definitely not an expert in this newest release of PCI guidance. I think it only came out like a month and a half ago. Yeah, September 9th. So yeah, a month and a half. So I haven't made it through the whole thing yet, but he's been doing a good job of kind of unraveling that. But the point is, even when organizations like PCI provide guidance specifically on like these cloud native technologies like containerization, there's still a translation layer. There's still another layer here of like, okay, well, what does that actually mean in my scenario or in most scenarios, etc. So it's painful to figure out what these things are asking us to do, and more importantly, are we actually doing it? And another thing that we heard a lot was like, these white papers are great. I really like them. There's a bunch of valuable stuff in there. I'm ready to get started. I would like to see if I'm doing it. Okay, white paper authors, please tell me how I can check. How do I know that I'm doing this guidance? It's kind of very easy to ivory tower, thou shalt, all data must be encrypted. I keep using that one, but it's easy to say that, but like, okay, but like, how do I do that? Here are the tools I'm using. What are the configurations I do? Is it easy? Is it hard? Is it custom? Is it not? And then that last bullet there, like, I see there's lots of things mentioned in these papers. I have a limited budget and a limited team. I can't afford to do something. I can't afford to do everything. So where do I start? What do I do first? Is there an order to this? Are there prerequisites? Is there a specific flow that would make it easier to accomplish things if I do them in a specific order? Things like that. So those are the questions that kind of kept coming up, where we would have guests come to our TAG-Security meetings, or we have a mailing list and a Slack channel and things like that. And people would kind of come in and ask those questions. So again, we decided to kick off this project as a way to start to help them. In phase 1, we took those white papers and we turned them into a standard set of controls. What happened there? That's weird. I got like an extra slide. Okay. We made this set of controls, and we also did a little bit of mapping. So instead of telling you what's in it, it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to pull this up. So we did a blog on the CNCF website, and we have this link to the cloud catalog, and you'll notice that this is a Google Sheet, which may not be your favorite thing. Wasn't my favorite thing either, but it was an easy format to get started and to get something done. We have a strong bias in the CNCF to actually accomplish things and get them over the finish line, even if they aren't perfect. Sometimes that hurts me a little bit in my soul, but I get over it. And so our goal is to continuously ship, continuously get better, and to get feedback. And so we've gotten feedback on this version 1, and we're in the process of addressing it. But you see it's a pretty basic schema, right? There's only A through H columns, and there's about 200 rows, just short of 200 rows. We've got two different white papers, the Cloud Native Security white paper and the Software Supply Chain Best Practices paper. And we have unique identifiers. Where did it come from? Which section in that document? And then the real meat of this is what's the title or the kind of short description of the control? Like, what's the thing we're talking about? And you can see some of them are really broad. Again, ivory towers kind of stuff. ABAC and RBAC are used. Okay, that's great. How do I know if I am or are not doing that? It's hard. Secret should have a short expiration period or time to live. I don't know, all kinds of things. Use TPM or VTPMs for your hardware root of trust. You've got all kind of resource group limitations, object group limitations, UC groups, things like that. Okay, so there's a bunch of, like I said, there's just about 200 to 194 of them. And then on top of that, we added some control implementation. So this is a best effort column. Again, ship something, don't wait until it's perfect. So where the group and I felt comfortable, we even with typos shipped this, right? And then we added a mapping to NIST 853 R5 because there's a high likelihood that if it maps to 853 R5, you can get it to the framework that matters to you. So if you care about high trust or ISO or SOC or PCI or GDPR or whatever, it's highly likely that you'll be able to figure out how to get to your framework from 853. That was at least our idea. And all of these for the Cloud Native Security white paper are NA, but if you go down to the software supply chain white paper, we have assurance and risk categories for these as well. So this is an attempt to give that prioritization, right? So inside of the white paper, there were these highs, moderate to highs, moderates, et cetera. And we were able to kind of distill this. So now you can use something this, you can sort and filter and start to get to some level of a priority. And there have been some people that have used this document to ship things into production and know that they were doing, or at least intentionally choosing not to do, certain controls. So that's been good. So that's what version 1 is. Still not sure why we have an empty slide there. Okay. There's like animations or something. I don't see how this is working. Let's get to the end of the animations. There we go. So one of the project anti-goals was developing yet another standard. So our goal was not to create our own list of controls or requirements, but just to help to ease the use of things that already exist. So we're not looking to create a new standard necessarily, although you could kind of argue that we did by making it more consumable and in the same format. And so this is where we are right now with the completion of phase 1 of this project. And contributions are welcome. So if you do things in the cloud native ecosystems, would definitely recommend taking a look at the findings that we have and providing feedback. It has actually migrated from Google Sheets into CSV file. It's getting a little better. It does kind of parse out a little bit in the GitHub UI, but it's the same content. And we've got some work in progress here to address feedback that we've gotten. So you can see here, we've got a whole bucket load of tweaks to the guidance. And the cool thing about this is because we've distilled these down into controls and they're looked at very specifically, we're able to critique them in smaller chunks. If you know anything about software development, you get better review, peer review with smaller changes. And so we're seeing that happen, and we're actually able to get those improvements upstream into the white papers. So by taking a microscope to various lines in the document, we're tweaking and improving it, and then we're feeding the information back up into the white papers just to make them higher quality white papers. Right now, there are 2 versions of the Cloud Native Security White Paper, and a third one has just kicked off to begin development. There's a lot of interest in, those different white papers. There's also a lot of reference implementation work happening in this space. SolarWinds and other breaches have really helped to bolster the focus on software supply chain, obviously, and a big part of these projects and the stuff that we've been doing for a while is software supply chain. So we already kind of looked at the white papers, and we talked a little bit about mapping to 853. So we're really just trying to make it easier to connect what auditors would be maybe more familiar with the 853 R5 controls, the new release. But we're open to mapping to other frameworks as well. So if you're interested in mapping things to a framework, you're welcome to join us. This is all volunteer work. So the next thing that we have been working on is performing automated assessments. So it's great that we have a giant list of things that you could do, but it's all it really is right now is a big list. And so for the second phase of this project, which is maybe just going to be one of those like evergreen like projects that continues forever, or crashes and burns, who knows, I'm open to both, is this like automated assessment. So our goal, we brought it down to like this one sentence for our goal. So we would like to assess the control status of cloud native environments and share the output in machine readable formats. So what we're talking about is push button receive report, right? Input some basic information about your environment so that it can perform discovery, and receive back a list of the controls that were assessed, the status of that assessment, successful, failed, compliant, not compliant, partially compliant, things like that, and share that output in a machine readable format. So when I say a machine readable format, I really mean OSCAL. Is anyone familiar with OSCAL? This is a NIST project.
Yes, this is
Similar to
Ryan.
the-
I'm familiar with it. Yep, I'm familiar.
Is there anything similar to the MITRE attack description language?
So it's different than MITRE attack. I thought you were going to say MITRE safe or SAF or whatever, because it is similar to MITRE SAF. So there's definitely some kind of overlapping projects. The security automation framework. This is focused on a different ecosystem, but is related. So like MITRE is doing some work on it, kind of generally in the space. But so OSCAL, I have no idea what that acronym stands for. Open Security Assessment Language, something, compliance assessment language, something like that. But so OSCAL hit their first milestone as a project in 2019, and they hit a 1.0 release in 2021, mid 2021. And so they're currently at version 1.0.4, meaning they've got some bug fixes out for their big rev in 2021. It is a government project. It does work a little bit slow, but luckily there is a growing ecosystem around OSCAL and some other related frameworks that I'm happy to talk about as well. And so OSCAL is a series of models and software to describe parts of a security program, specifically focused on controls. So if you're familiar with different security frameworks, there are some like ISO 27001, which are more focused on creating a security program and managing security in a reasonable way, like the right people are signing off on risks and risks are being managed and centralized, and you make intentional decisions about where to invest your money and time. And if you don't do something, it's because you chose not to, and there's not like a surprise. If you have governance, people are following it, and when they're not following it, there's a process to figure out why and fix that root cause. There's not a huge focus on controls in ISO. So they have Annex A and ISO 27002, but those are kind of control suggestions. There's very few actual requirements, and the idea is that in the 2022 version, they might actually get rid of Annex A entirely. So there's no controls in it. But the reason why I say all of that detail is because OSCAL, while it has this controls focus, they have said numerous times that they've like internally mapped ISO 27001 COBIT and all of the NIST requirements, FedRAMP and 853 through this model, and verified that the schema of all these models works for the controls and non-controls based frameworks. In reality, none of that stuff is public, and they're not planning on releasing it either. But they wanted to test to make sure that it could support those sorts of control-based and non-control frameworks. But really, the things that you're going to find with OSCAL are controls-based assessments, which means you have network restrictions, you have a firewall, you do web proxy filtering, you do whatever, antivirus and app whitelisting and things like that. But this is really focused on the whole compliance story around controls. So while you've got this controls layer, which is kind of like the base of everything, and you've got a controls catalog and a controls profile where you're kind of assembling different controls and putting them in a bundle. Once you make the bundle, that's just the controls that you've selected. Then you need to identify how it's implemented and how you're going to assess those controls to make sure that they're working. And they've even got things like POAMs. So if you say that you need a control, but you don't have that control yet, you put together a plan, you call it a POAM, and you can describe that in this model. So if you do anything with FedRAMP, you know that there's this big thing called an SSP, the System Security Plan. They've got a model for that too. It's this giant stack of paperwork that you can expect the government's definitely going to want in order to buy your stuff, right? The big win with this is that you should be able to generate that giant stack of paperwork using fully machine readable information. And by machine readable, it's XML, GAG, JSON, or YAML. So they primarily, XML was like the first class citizen, but they do support JSON and YAML for this.
YAML, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So you can you can define all of these different things, an assessment plan, an assessment results. So for instance, a penetration test is a form of an assessment. And if you perform a penetration test and you have findings, you could create those findings in an assessment results, in the assessment results schema, essentially. And then you could map it through all of these different layers back to specific controls and generate all kinds of like interesting different reports. The idea is that this is heavy into automation and interoperability. And at AWS Reinforce, AWS has talked about their use of OSCAL and how they have to be every certification attestation in ATO under the sun, right, in multiple different countries. And for their SSP stack, the giant thing of paperwork for FedRAMP, they previously spent roughly 2,000 person hours a year maintaining that. So, and they have to do this yearly. So that's like a person. They were able to get that down to 20 hours of manual work per year using OSCAL. And that's based on where it is right now. Like that was from last year, from, two assessments ago to the last assessment, which then where they did the measurement and then they presented, whatever it was a month or two ago. That was the reduction in human effort that they found. And the goal is for this to scale out past FedRAMP. Obviously NIST and FedRAMP, they're very kind of interconnected, but this has been tested with other frameworks, and there's an ecosystem around, especially GRC tools, looking to use this schema either as an interoperability format or as an underlying schema to be able to have lots of different relationships and report generation and to automatically identify problems. And what I really like about it is when an auditor comes in and asks questions about, are you doing X or Y? That kind of becomes this more report generation response, as opposed to, let me see what I can remember, or, we've had some turnover in the department. I'm not sure who can answer that question for you, or misanswering, over answering, under answering, things like that, or them kind of catching an issue during the sampling, random sampling basis approaches. You could easily generate your own reports regularly, daily, hourly, and know where your gaps are, where your issues are. Now, this is a machine. This machine needs to be fed, right? It needs to be fed inputs, these different bits of information, for it to really be useful. So you need to have lots of different assessment results feeding into this machine for those really cool outputs and reports and dashboards to be able to be fully automated. And so that's where the project that I'm working on is focused. Our goal is to be able to describe the controls in the white papers, in the controls layer, in this profile and catalog. And then we want to shovel data into this machine, this OSCAL machine of assessment results, and map them the whole way through. And the way that mapping looks is a little something like this. So you can see it's pretty much that last slide just kind of turned over a little bit. It's got more detail, which you probably can't read because it's really small. But you've got this like kind of controls and these profiles and baselines, which of the controls did you choose? The security plan, which is your environment and your information. There's some automated things like which controls you chose. You kind of source those downstream and compose them up. But there's also information like in the SSP, you have data flow diagrams and network diagrams with big, thick red borders and all kinds of stuff. And that's in the SSP2. And so there's lots of other groups working on other parts of this, which are things like, how do I automatically generate the network diagrams? Because I don't want people to have to manually create network diagrams anymore. If you're on-prem, that's a thing that's been tried. And I don't know of any great software to do it. Maybe there is some. But it's hard, you do all this sort of discovery and scanning and configuration management of systems, and you try to smash it together in a diagram. It usually doesn't work that well. But there are tools in cloud ecosystems where there are these well-defined APIs and methods to create asset inventories that can happen at least at the kind of cloud services and cloud resources layer, right? Once you start getting into like what's running on the system, you need to layer on some of your own assessment tools like an inspec or something like that to identify if the operating system's hardened properly or things like that. But anyways, you've got the system security plan, lots of different people working on parts of that. And then you've got an assessment plan. What are the things that you are looking to assess or need to assess on what cadence? What are the actual tasks and grouping of tasks? And then assessment results. We talked about pen tests or just running a script. And so there is some support for automated assessments right now in OSCAL, but it's kind of imperfect. And so we're working with AJ, who's the person who opened this issue, and he works for NIST on the OSCAL team. And there's this concept of roles, and roles are really just a more detailed way to describe how to test a control and to kind of work on facilitating those assessment results that you have tested a control, right? You'll see here, there's lots of goals. Not all of them are done. This is very much work in progress. I don't know that there's even a real ETA for this. I can tell you that in their documentation, they say that full support for automated assessments in OSCAL is a 2.0 thing. And again, they're at 1.0.4. And their next two milestones are 1.1 and 1.2. So it's not like they're jumping from 1.0 to 2.0 either. That this might be a year out, might be a year and a half out, might be longer. The government likes to move slow and methodically, right? But we're working on this, and as an open source community, we're happy to work on things that are beta or low maturity. And so we're working with them to develop it, and we're working to implement it, these roles and assessment results and things like that for cloud native tools. And the other part of this is if we identify that a tool can't be configured in a compliant way, we're going to work with those with the project maintainers and develop a plan to put it in place. Either we'll contribute it, they'll contribute it, and we'll be involved, something along those lines. But the idea is that this will also help us identify gaps in the abilities of these projects to be compliant with different frameworks by doing this, again, similar to the white papers, when we put them under the microscope and we really look at a line, one sentence in isolation as a control statement, you can clearly say, maybe you shouldn't say use this one tool as the one true only way to accomplish a control. Maybe you should generalize things and give examples of ways you can do it, things like that. Because you can't be out of compliance because you didn't pick the same tool that the white paper developers liked. That's just one simple example. So yeah, by putting those projects under the microscope in runtime, we're going to be able to push features back upstream and hopefully get them remediated. That's the cool thing about the CNCF. It's a very positive ecosystem. Lots of people always willing to change and improve. And everybody's been really good to work with. Even doing the security assessments of these projects, when you say, oh, this is a problem, they don't try to argue that it's not a problem. They try to understand. They want to know, why is that a problem? How could I do better? What about this solution? How about this? I've got this layer over here. How does this all work? Am I doing it right? And they'll be the ones developing proof of concept code to exploit their own systems, right? They're very interested in understanding this. So the story so far with our project is that we are tracking everything on GitHub. This is a fully open and transparent project. We've got just this screenshot's a little bit old, but we've just got a few different sorts of tasks. Some of them are done and in review. We've got that controls feedback, supporting a new version of Cloud Native Security white paper. That's just almost done. Updating a roadmap, things like that. And we're working with a lot of different teams. We work with NIST a lot. We work with CIS and CSA a fair bit. And then there are other groups like the OpenSSF. We also work with them a lot. And then there are some other groups that we work with to a lesser degree. But the one thing that I've loved about this project is everybody's on the same team. There's no one who says my way is better than your way. Everyone's saying, hey, I'll give you my way if you can make it better. Let's compare notes. What do you think is right? I'll tell you what I think is right. Let's come to an agreement, or we can agree to disagree. It's okay to have different opinions, but we all are still collaborating. And that I really love. It's really wonderful ecosystem to work in. I can tell you that those couple groups that I was talking about, CIS, the Center for Internet Security, Cloud Security Alliance, CSA, NIST, and CNCF, and OpenSSF are all very open with slightly different focuses, right? Very, very focused on this compliance, controls mapping, automated assessment problems. Because people, if you take auditing and compliance and all that stuff out of the picture entirely, if you're a good security engineer and you think you implemented something properly, you want to know if you did, right? And if you didn't, you want to know how you could do better, right? You want to know, what mistake did I make? How can I learn from that? How could I implement this more thoroughly, more scalably, et cetera? You want to kind of have that continuous improvement. And being able to run tools that understand your environment automatically with very little configuration and can give you that effectiveness, efficacy measurements, dashboarding, things like that. It's just really powerful. I actually think of it as an observability problem. I think that security is actually kind of like a subset of observability, that we need to know. Like some of the big problems with security is that we just don't know that things are happening, right? Almost every framework under the sun says, what's the first thing you do? Asset inventory, right? You always want to know what your assets are so you can secure them, that whole problem. So all right, so that's all my slides. So if you are interested in this project, on the TAG-Security repo, issue 845 is our second phase. So you can see the group of people. We've got, a solid group of people interested. There's a few that haven't tagged onto this channel or onto this issue. And I do try to update it when big things happen. We recently changed the meeting location, so I posted that in here. We have a roadmap that I published a while back and presented, etc. So this is the ultimate place to go, is this 845 issue. If you kind of want to secretly follow what's going on, you can just hit subscribe and you don't have to comment or anything. You won't show up under participants, but you'll get notifications when I post things on there. So you're welcome to do that. And then, of course, if you want to get more involved, we can, if I can remember how to do that. We have meeting notes and tons of different bits of information that are all publicly available. Again, we try to do very open things. You can see our prior conversation notes and who's been there and who's doing what, etc. So you can get yourself self-service, get yourself up to speed. Our repo is public. Yeah, and then I am giving a presentation next week, a week from today, in Detroit at the Cloud Native Security Con. So if you're familiar, the way that this works is Cloud Native Security Con is a kind of like an augmentation of the Kubernetes conference. So KubeCon or Cloud Native Con North America is Wednesday through Friday of next week. And then they have these additional events. If I don't know how to computer really. But they have other events on Monday and Tuesday. And so the Cloud Native Security Conference is on Monday and Tuesday. This is my talk it's a quick 10-minute talk, really a call to action for the people that are there to say, hey, do you want to come automate the assessment of security controls? Is this a pain you have? Come talk to us. We're going to really start working on this. And then the other thing is, after that, my group, Steel City Information Security, has an event coming up on November 15th. It's probably going to be at this place called Shorty's on the North Shore. They have like duck pin bowling and stuff. We're just trying to iron out the details, and then I will add it in here. And we're going to be talking about cloud security stuff there. So it's a social. It's not a presentation. There will be none of this. There won't be any slides. I'll probably buy you a beer if you come out. It's really just like, let's talk about cloud security. So we could talk about this cloud security assessment stuff that I'm doing, or other, cloud security stuff, whatever floats your boat. If you can find someone there to talk to that is the same boat as you, it's more about socialization. We'll figure out what we're going to do after that. Maybe wait until January for another event and do maybe a presentation or something on cloud security, or maybe we'll do a hands-on lab. I'm not sure yet. But yeah, we're going to be continuing to talk about cloud security and DevOps stuff there for a little bit. Cool. Let me jump in the chat. We got a few notes. Yep. So that's the OSCAL page. People heard of it. Yeah. Open Security Controls Assessment Language. There we go. Veronica, you heard of it? Okay, great. Yeah. There are some workshops. Oh, you're pointing to this. Yeah. So this is the slide deck from. This is not. Oh, this is different. This is.
Yeah, I was just including some stuff I'm aware of.
Okay.
That was related to their submission to OSCAL.
Yeah. Yep. Yes, there's a bunch of stuff, lots of challenges. Yeah. I wonder if I can find the AWS reinforce OSCAL slides. Let me see if I can. So this is Michelle Iorga. She is in charge of the NIST program. It was after she was talking. Yeah, so we've got some of this. Yeah, here we go. So actually I cut it in half. It's 4,000 hours per year to make the ATO package. I said the SSP, it's very similar. There's some, additional stuff. And then with OSCAL, they got it to 2040, right? So pretty significant cut in the manual workforce hours to maintain this gigantic package of information. So I thought that was really cool. Yeah. Let me go back to the chat. Yeah, there we go. The first OSCAL SSP. So things are really starting to ramp up with this as far as actual adoption, real use cases, real implementations. Libraries are a little bit lacking right now. So as you can imagine, in the government, they prefer different sorts of languages than, if you're building something fresh nowadays. So we're in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, we prefer Go and Python for software development. So that's what we're going to be writing things in. But there are no libraries for OSCAL for either of those. They're like primarily Java based right now, right? And there's some Node and things like that. But we're going to probably be making our own and working with NIST to create a testing library that can ensure that it's conformant to the spec. So we're working with them to create that so that numerous new libraries can be created in different languages, or we can have like single implementations with multiple language. I saw a couple people sending me some messages about the slides. So SCI.so/ISC2 is where that's at. You'll probably need to do an HTTP on that or something. That'll just redirect you to the right page. Wherever you end up, you can bookmark the last thing. You don't have to use the shortener. Cool. All right. So that's all the chat questions. Did anyone else have any thoughts or questions or feedback?
Yeah, John, I mean, I know you're involved with a lot of the working groups with NIST, Michaela very well. Do you know like Matthew Donkin at ABS? Like, who are you working with at NIST currently? And like, what is that relationship like? And how's it working with them as far as this goes, or anything else you're working on
You're
with
calling
them?
me out a little
How
bit
does that
here.
go?
You're calling me out a little bit here because I'm horrible with names. So I work with AJ and Michelle most. There have been a few people on some of the meetings I've been on, but if you ask me to remember their names, it's just not going to happen. Sorry, I mostly work with AJ. So AJ runs OSCAL.club. He joined NIST after being interested in OSCAL, only to work on OSCAL. So he is a true like OSCAL nerd, which I love. And he's all in on it. He took a pay cut and went to work for the government to have like less flexibility in certain respects because he really believes in OSCAL. So he runs this OSCAL OSCAL club
What's his full name?
project. There's a awesome, what's that?
What's his full name? AJ?
Alexander.
Okay.
I think he goes by like Alex or Al sometimes and then he goes by AJ sometimes too. So I just like circle which one. I just like round robin choose one to call him that day, and he keeps responding to me. So
Was he Alexander? No, I'm thinking maybe someone else. I see Alexander Hosper, but it's probably a different person.
But anyway, so he maintains the awesome OSCAL list. So anytime there's a new project out there, this is a good thing to keep an eye on and subscribe to. Yeah, and he's contributing to our project a bit. I think he's got a PR open right now to start adding some OSCAL content. So if you want to look what our OSCAL looks like, work in progress, it's a giant pile of XML. But we are working on automation to take the CSV, render it into all three formats of OSCAL, and then we're going to do releases and attach those as assets. But I mean, it's nothing super fancy here with these different controls until we start getting to some of the more detailed like linkages and the layering and things like that. We're just building out the base set of controls right now, and then we're going to jump to the assessment side, which is that whole other end of the spectrum. If you remember the vertical stuff, we're going to like do the squeeze approach, start at the beginning and the end, and then move towards the middle. All right, did anyone else have any questions? Is anyone aware of those white papers or doing like a similar but different thing? I'm like really interested in like this MITRE SAF or SAFE thing. I wasn't aware of until a few months ago when one of my students, when I was teaching SANS, told me about it. And so I poked around and started playing with it a bit. But I didn't even know that this thing existed, right? There's so many projects out there, you can't possibly know about them all. So I'd love to hear about what people are doing to self-assess, test their controls, commercial, non-commercial, whatever, to accomplish this. Is anyone doing that?
Do you know when
Okay.
SAFE was launched? By chance, you know how old it is?
No, it seems like it's been around for a bit. Some of the repos are pretty old.
Yeah.
They like 2019, stuff like that.
It's older because it had some time where it wasn't really getting anything on it.
Is it one of those things where it's maybe old and then it kind of got picked up after all? Because I've heard of it, but I was just not sure how old it was. So
I don't know. We can go back to like the first commit. But this makes it look not that old, but there are definitely some other projects when I was working through this that are quite old and have been abandoned for a long time, like some of these hardening things. Yeah, they're like 4 years old. It's kind of like a bundle. They parted the stuff they had together, glued it together with their Heimdall schema and the command line stuff. Anyways, did someone else come off mute?
I think it's pretty interesting that you're trying to come up with a way to organize the reporting of compliance. In my first real true security compliance role, I struggled a lot with this, and was looking and thinking surely there ought to be a better way to do this. And what I kind of came to think about was the actual environments in which you want to control. It seems like they would be helpful if they could standardize a control reporting framework to be able to link into the control, because it seems like the evidence of the control should be in the environment where the control is being required of. And so how do you bring that forward and connect it in real time?
Yeah, it's really tricky. Actually, we had this conversation at this Cloud Native Controls. We have a bi-weekly meeting. We had a meeting today, and we were actually talking about that because so there's the evidence of the control being effective or being in place, as well as the actual control being effective and in place. But then there's for each component in your environment, what controls does it expect? So you have a microservice and you deploy it somewhere. The microservice probably has some built-in controls to it, but it might expect that there's like a WAF in front of it somewhere, or an ingress controller, or a reverse proxy, or firewall, or whatever. And that's what it wants. A great example is some architectures that receive mutual TLS from clients, that happens upstream of the microservice. And so the microservice like expects that you're already authenticated with MTLS upstream somewhere. And sure, you can like re-authenticate, reauthorize on the back end, re-encrypt on the back end, all that stuff, but it's going to be coming from like internal to internal now. You're not going to do it from the client. So you need to, it just gets really sticky. And so how do the different parts of your environments announce what controls they want to, what sort of environment they want to live in, so that you can compare that against what environment it is living in and see if they reconcile or if they don't. And that's really another interesting aspect of this. But the other part is like evidence for your controls being in the environment itself can be a little bit sticky, because you may have many environments, and then you would have many places where your evidence is, and then now it's like distributed, and you need some sort of discovery of the evidence to service your audits or to answer questionnaires or whatever, which can be a little bit painful. or if you have a compromise in that environment, your evidence could get trashed. And like, so certain frameworks like FedRAMP, High Trust, and a few other ones might require like 1 year of evidence. And if someone goes in and dumps a database, like you can't get certified for a full another year after your controls are back up and running. If that were to happen, that'd be pretty bad too. So some people will kind of ship them off one way, like a write-only location, like put them in an AWS audit-only account, or a different subscription or log analytics workspace or something in Azure. And then the last thing I'll say on that is there is work that we're doing in the OpenSSF. We kind of loosely, including me, not really. There's a group of like 3 or 4 people working on a thing called guac right now. It's like a backronym, right? They wanted to say guac for guacamole because there are other frameworks similar to this. One of them is called salsa. So now we're just doing chip condiment, whatever, chip dips. So we've got salsa and guac. Guac is newer, though. It's not even, it's like pre-alpha right now. And they're going to be announcing it at KubeCon, although it's open source now. So this isn't like secret. The whole idea is that it's a graph database with a defined schema and a command line and things like that. And you just shove all your evidence into it, and then you can query it in certain ways to aggregate information or to identify relationships between information, to say, through my 5-step process, did all of my security controls operate effectively? You would need lots of bits of evidence and graph edges and nodes in the database, but the response to your query would be yes or no, right? But you need all these things in one place in order to effectively do that sort of a query. And so people are working on that, and we're actually working with them because for our proof of concept, I'd like to use guac as the evidence repository. And then we're going to be authoring Cypher queries. It's a Neo4j database. And we're going to be authoring like Cypher queries that align to compliance frameworks and controls and security requirements and stuff. And then we're also going to feed we're going to be shoveling in the machine with the assessment. The assessment results will be able to go into this as a artifact as well, potentially. And so we're going to, again, we said I'm doing the kind of squeeze starting at the control and at the assessment side, and they might fill some of the middle, and it's another way where we can all work together. But yeah, I mean, like this, the controls information, where it goes, how to store it, all that stuff. It doesn't feel like a very well solved problem right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of surfaces. There's I don't, have you ever run into Alan Woods?
Alan Woods?
Yes.
No.
He's an ex MI government employee who has a lot of writing out there on auditing and compliance. And he kind of helped me refine my thinking about where the evidence should live.
Interesting. Yeah, I like the idea of leaving it, like putting it closer to the controls and closer to the environments, because like when I'm writing code or designing environments, I always think about deleting the thing that I'm writing. Like, how am I going to get rid of this at the end? Or how, like, I want to make things easy to delete. So like the being modular and things like that, make it easy to get rid of at the end. And so if an environment goes away, to easily clean up all of the associated evidence, it'd be a fairly simple task and straightforward. I find that in a lot of programs, there's cruft, there's just like junk sitting around, or misinformation because it used to be true but is no longer true, which just like misdirects people, confuses people, etc. And that's why I'm always thinking about deleting and cleaning up, because that, I think it's like really poisonous to just have things sitting around that are unmaintained.
I mean, there's certainly an argument to clean your environment, but also the point at which the evidence went from being true to untrue contains information. Why did it go from being true to untrue? So I'm really bad about cleaning stuff up. I never clean stuff up. I leave it linger forever.
Yep.
Hey, John, quick question. So for, those of us who've kind of done assessments and worked in Kubernetes a little bit more, I think we kind of have some understanding of why we would use the new white papers and things like that. But, I think when we started talking about like hardening or having standards for, Kubernetes or really any service, a lot of us will reference CIS benchmarks and go through that process and, harden against that because there's scripts or open source solutions, or even from vendors, providing CIS benchmarks. So, AWS has, you can build your EC2 instances to a certain hardened image and things like that. I guess how going forward, and for those of us who want to bring things back into our organizations, and we might not know about CNCF, what would you recommend, or how would you recommend, kind of having those conversations of bringing that up to saying, there's a new project or there's this organization that is trying to help build a more secure foundation? What would you recommend for anybody who's not necessarily familiar with this?
Yeah, so I have been thinking of security recently as not really the end goal, right? But rather a side effect of doing things in a more modern way. And that's what's really attractive to me about cloud native security, is that it feels like we're all on the same team. Whereas with traditional security, enterprise security, it's felt to me in the past like, you've got the security/risk teams, and then you've got the developers, and there's like this stronger, bigger tension because security imposes their will, slows things down, stops things, or sets unrealistic expectations. They say musts and alls, every things like that, which are honestly ridiculous. No business operates with alls, must, any's, alls all the time. And so it needs to be more balanced. What you get in these cloud native environments is that we're kind of on the same team, because if you do things the right way, you get development speed, feature delivery, like velocity, and security. And security just becomes a side effect of good engineering practices, which we've always kind of said that a little bit, right? But I can give some examples on why it's different now. I will in a second. I think, I think so. If you think about how you would maybe design something now, and how it actually like follows that, there's a 3-letter acronym, DIE, and it contrasts the traditional CIA. So you've got confidentiality, availability, and integrity in the traditional model. And to some degree, you're always going to need that. But if you start to create systems which are more modern, and you do the cattle-based approach where you're destroying systems and recreating them regularly and replacing them instead of updating them, you don't have pets, where you don't care and feed, you don't name them, you send them off to the slaughterhouse, replace them, etc. When you have those cattle, you start to get into this DIE design. So D is, let's see if I can get this right. So D is distributed. So distributed system. More modern way of saying that would be like a serverless or Kubernetes, but obviously there's other ways to do it. I is immutable. So you don't make changes to things when it's running. And then E is ephemeral. So they exist when you need them and go away when you don't. These are all things that are enabled by technologies like Kubernetes and serverless, but also cloud security providers allow you to provision and deprovision resources with API calls instead of racking and stacking and hitting power buttons and whatever. And if you think about CIA and DIE, you can kind of map together. It's a little bit lossy in my opinion. I don't think it's a perfect argument, but you can map together CIA and DIE and see how DIE accomplishes a lot of what we have with CIA. And so if you just purely develop an ephemeral, immutable, distributed environment, then you reduce the need to do those CIA focused controls that end up really slowing things down dramatically. And there's presentations and a book from Sunil Yu called the Cyber Defense Matrix, where he talks about this DIE framework. And it's really, really good. I would highly recommend watching one of his talks on it if you can. He often uses a couple of different graphs about how to measure pets versus cattle and to make a gradient, like a spectrum of how much CIA versus how much CIA do you actually need to apply, which is painful and slow, versus how much security you're just going to get as a side effect when you have more cattle and the DIE in place. So like, so I guess like Joe, to your question, I guess I'm like leaning a little bit towards not like security is not the pitch, right? Security is not the end result. It's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make better systems. And if we engineer them in a DIE model or more, I just call it modern. I just say more modern model, then you're just going to reduce the toil, like the CIA toil of procedural rigor and other sorts of overhead work and manual processes and things like that. I also think that once you get to a more modern environment, security, I think I said this earlier, security starts to change and it becomes really an observability problem. And all we're trying to do is monitor and measure everything, and then continuously improve. And in my mind, you can build a really strong program about just trying to get better every day and not caring about where you are or where you need to go. Regulations don't love that. Regulations have requirements and people go to jail if they don't do things. And that's just life. But I think that there's a lot to be said to just measure where you are, measure the right things, get better over time, allow yourself to take the time that it needs to do things the right way, re-engineer your platform. So that's totally a non-answer to your question, because what I'm saying is just like throw everything you have away and rebuild it from scratch with a new approach. But then maybe you'll just start getting these sorts of things as side effects, and observability can go to the observability team. So security goes to the observability team, your DevRel, whatever team, tooling team, productivity team, whatever you guys call it. And you start to get resources from other divisions outside of security because you're now not solving a security problem, you're solving an observability problem. That's it. Rip and replace.
Yep.
Always.
Yeah, no, John, that was, I mean, you kind of hit a couple of the points that I think is important to capture here is, you know, it's what is being done in CNCF isn't just a checklist, right? Where it's not just, looking at it from a benchmark or just, okay, if you do this checklist, then you're going to be compliant with NIST 853. Like it's not designed that way. But like, I think if we talk to different groups and, we all have different size organizations, but when we start talking about cloud native and how that's a different approach and a more modern way that you have to look at it, as opposed to just being this, I mean, even the lift and shift conversation, it's different, right? And so the way you operate your systems on-prem or way you operate your systems, even in AWS, if you do a lift and shift or other clouds, that there's a certain way of doing that. But when you're looking at it from development perspective, you're not just doing benchmarks and hitting, these sort of checklists and things like that. It's really changing the approach. And like you said, the observability, you're really just looking at what's being deployed at that point, because it's already being incorporated and from a secure perspective from the beginning. So no, I
Yeah.
appreciate that the way you had articulated that. So I just thinking about for the greater, other people that are on the call, when you start talking about Kubernetes, there's definitely different implementations. And like I said, from my experience with it, from doing assessment work, it's, there's different organizations that think differently with how they should be doing things. So, yep.
Yeah, there's a lot to that too. Like, this is obviously a maturity curve as well, right? You don't just start with automating everything, and like you need to do some things manually for some period of time. You should just always be unhappy and always be uncomfortable doing anything manually, right? That should always kind of gnaw at you a little bit and want to do it better and chip away at it regularly if you can. And so when you're in that lower maturity state, like you still need to have a manual process, write it down, and perform those tasks with a plan to automate them. But you, by defining more clearly what the procedure is, what the tasks are, having a checklist isn't a bad thing, because now you're writing a design doc for the automation for the future, right? You're clarifying your expectations of a system, of an environment, things like that. So, and then the other thing I want to mention is we talked a lot about like Kubernetes and stuff, and like I don't want anyone to misinterpret what I'm saying. Kubernetes is horrible in lots of situations, and it's not a tool that you just throw at every single scenario or situation. I'm actually, I do like Kubernetes for some things, but it's totally overboard for a lot of places where I see it. And I actually have a lot of respect when I look at an environment that's servicing, a moderate to large amount of customers, and they've been able to do it without Kubernetes because they've avoided a lot of the overhead and complexity that comes with it. Like I feel pretty strongly that until you need it, you shouldn't touch the beast, right? It can be daunting. So in the chat, there were a few things. We're watching Heimdall had a proof of value. Looked interesting from checking infrastructure controls. Yeah, they have a decent ontology, it seems like, but I haven't seen a ton of adoption of it. They had some cool tools. So this is the MITRE SAF safe thing. They have that HDF format, which is like it's just like a schema for defining things, that controls assessment and stuff. And they have a lot of import and export transformations. So you can take HDF, you can take things from Splunk and make it HDF, and then HDF and shove it back in Splunk. And there's like there's a big list of them. That's one of the big things they tried to interoperate a bit. Guac and Salsa sounds like a CROB project. I don't even know what a CROB project is. The internet tells me that's a typo, so I'm not sure. Salsa.dev, yeah, that's the website. So this right here is the Salsa .dev website. So it's kind of sponsored by a bunch of different orgs. It's moved into the OpenSSF, but Google is one of the biggest people pushing it. It's got a four-step program. And if you go in here, they've got some nice kind of summary information about what it says detailed. This is really the summary about what these levels mean. You can get even deeper. This is my favorite summary table of the whole thing, which is what do you need to meet these requirements? So you can see solve 1, it's a scripted build, provenance, which provenance is a pain in the butt if you ask me, but it feels like pure labor. But they really want you to have provenance for your documents, so you can use like a project like InToto and just generate that. It's not a big deal. And then Salsa level 2, if you're doing decent software development, you can get to Salsa level 2 pretty quickly. And then yeah, you can see it dramatically goes up from there. Salsa 3 and Salsa 4 have just more requirements on the environment, but getting to Salsa level 2 is a pretty attainable thing for a lot of build programs. And then yeah, you can see that it said that was the detailed page, but this isn't even the detailed page. There's a lot of details in the spec. remember if it's here. No. There's a lot of detail that goes into this. I just can't remember exactly where it is. But anyways, there are some reusable, if you use GitHub Actions, there's some reusable workflows. I think that might be this that Google made for like Go projects and things like that, where you can instantly jump to salsa level 4 just by using the reusable workflows and then configuring them, things like that. So yeah, so that's salsa. It's a supply chain project essentially. Cool. Chris. Oh, C-Rob. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Guac and Salsa, yeah, he's not actually involved with that very much. That's funny. Okay. Cool. Yeah, thanks, Austin. Thanks for coming up. That's all I had. Did anyone else have anything? Anyone? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I had posted in the chat the MCRA. Well, this was like a really good presentation. I really appreciate it. Because like I was recently referencing the MCRA for like our migration to M365. So seeing this like was really insightful. So just thank you.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the MCRA. I had popped it open. Yeah, there's been a lot of focus on reference architectures, which I really love, because I get frustrated by people who just say, do this, the kind of Iber Tower statements, guidance, requirements, whatever. And it's like, but how? Like, how do I actually do this? How would you recommend is if I do it this way? Like, I've got 5 different ways I can implement it that technically meet what you just said, but I have a feeling that not all of them would pass your muster. So like, what's the deal? And so I love seeing reference architectures. If you are interested in supply chain stuff, there is a project called Fresca, but it's not the sparkling soda water stuff. I think it's BuildSec Fresca, yeah. Which is it's an OpenSSF project, which it's a reference architecture for creation of artifacts like CI/CD pipelines, essentially, right? And it uses really modern ways to do things, and it's got your standard like provenance, pinning, signing. I think they do hermetic builds. What else do they do? They have policy enforcement in the pipeline. They have eBPF in the pipeline as well. So they have observability on the build systems, which is kind of crazy. So they can monitor the system calls of the things happening in the pipeline to build your artifact for malicious activity. So it's kind of like in the kernel level monitoring. So like a backdoor like SolarWinds would be pretty easy, well, not easily detected, but like there'd be ways, like clear ways to detect it, because it would be a thing that makes syscalls, right? Even if it's like a file copy or whatever, or just file system changes or anything like that. So it's some pretty cool stuff there. That's roughly the same team. A lot of overlap with the Guac team, but they are technically different. The Fresca, Guac. There's like a million projects out there. I feel like I could just ramble forever because of like ever since I joined this. If you want to just learn about like 5 to 20 new projects every week, just join the CNCF and OpenSSF and start following different issues that interest you and a couple Slack channels, and people will just post the craziest thing. It's like, oh, this like nonchalant, like, hey, I was working on this the other day, figured I'd post it here. And I'm like, okay, like it's probably 1,000-line Python script or something. It's like, no, it's this like super mature project that's been worked on for like an hour and a half with like 15 developers in-house, and then they just open sourced it. And they're just like, yeah, here's my thing. And that happens like all the time. It's like really incredible, chaotic, awesome. That's like, yeah, it is definitely a bit chaotic, especially with the Biden executive order after SolarWinds. Those deadlines, it's crazy every time one of those deadlines hits too. Link for the Guac project. So that is right here. And if they just did a call for people to help them test, because they're doing a they're presenting this like next week, like on Wednesday or Thursday or something at KubeCon, and they want to make sure that their instructions are functional. So Brandon reached out and said, hey, anyone who's interested, follow these setup instructions and see if it works. And if it doesn't, like, let us know, open an issue, because they want that. And then if you go through the setup, it's kind of like there's like examples towards the bottom of like queries, like Cypher queries that you can write that are like related to some of the things we were talking about earlier. But yeah, so that's the repo. 190 commits. All right, they're not doing bad. It's only been out there for a couple months. It used to be called the Artifact Fact Finder. I like Guac better. Artifact Fact Finder is just a lot harder to say. Yeah, June 10th is when they ended the project. So a couple months they've been working on it. Cool. Well, I'll stop blathering on then. We can wrap this up.
Yeah,
Thanks everyone for coming to my TED Talk.
Hey, I mean, yeah, it was a lot of good content. I'm glad you were able to speak on so many items related to this. So that's awesome. That's what we want to hear.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Yep, thanks, John.
Thank you.
Members of the board, does anybody want to stay on even just for 10 minutes to have a really quick board meeting? Because I kind of need one. So if we just want to just 10 minutes to discuss anything, if you're on the board, is that all right?
Yeah, just for the whole group, I just sent out a basically like a thanks for attending sort of thing, but it has a bunch of the links that we had talked about, some of the information that John presented, some information about OSCAL and then the things we talked about earlier. So feel free to check your email. It's through Meetup. So as long as you get that, it doesn't fall into spam, you should have that in your email box. But just as a kind of a summary of the call. So thanks again, John, for your time and presentation.
Yep.
Well, thanks for pulling it together.
Yeah,
Send it
thank
all
you.
out.
Joe, you're so
Yes.
organized with those notes. I just saw them.
Thank you, Joe.
There's the
Thanks,
man.
Carl.
All right, well, I'll jump off and let you all have your exciting board meeting.
Yeah.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good luck in Detroit, John. Have
See
fun.
ya.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
luck with that talk. Hey, John, you got any
Yeah.
other interesting talks coming up? You going to any other conferences for the rest of the year?
This year, no, I'm trying to not go to anything if I can. I'm going to KubeCon, and then I'm teaching a class in November, and then I'm taking a month and a half off. I won't be going anywhere until February. I think I go to Dallas. March, I'll be in Florida and somewhere else. I don't know, but not this year. No, I'm trying to take as much time as I can off this Q4.
Hey, that's good. Alrighty. Well, hey, we'll see you around. Thanks again. And sorry I can't attend more of the meetings. It's just it's my meeting death zone when you have that. So
No worries.
like I have like
Amazing.
4 items in my Outlook calendar and then plus another another one on my Google calendar. So you can have up to 5 events going on and it's funny. I normally don't have death by meeting, but it's just the time that you have yours. So.
That's intense. I don't envy you at all, man.
Well, most of them aren't too bad, and I can clearly prioritize. But the problem is, there's no way I could put yours above any of those 5.
I mean, it actually kind of works out. If they're all at once, then you have a really good excuse to only go to one at a time, because it's impossible to split up.
Yes.
But instead of like going to 5 meetings that day, you can just go to 1.
No, well, you just say, "Oh, I'm in the other meeting," and then
Yeah.
unless they check and do their homework. But yeah, it's just funny. So, but I mean, everything going well with the meeting. I mean, it sounds like you've got a good group going there. So.
Yeah, it's been pretty consistent. We get 5, 6, 7, like I think we had like 12 people one week. So
Cool.
good.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk to you later.
All right, catch you later.
All right.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, bye.
Thanks, everybody.